I'm not here to blame or shame you. I'm not telling you anything that I don't tell myself. I'm not saying anything that I don't or won't or haven't said in any other room. I am not calling you out. I'm calling you in. I'm calling you in to the divine union of love and power. This single concept that I learned from Kingian principles is the key to how we meet and exceed the expectations that get us ever closer to freedom. I'm not inviting you into a catchy slogan or even a hashtag. I'm not inviting you into the kind of anemic love that is sentimental and useless. That kind of love lacks power. I'm not calling you into the kind of power that is uncaring and abusive. That kind of power lacks love. I am calling you into the divine union of love and power. It is a union that allows love to be powerful enough to take on systems and not just individuals. It gives love the audacity to seek justice swiftly and not merely incrementally. It is a union that allows power to be informed by love and disrupt all that stands in the way of freedom. I am calling you in to family and beloved community with one another. The beauty in this is that we don't have to wait to practice the divine union of love and power until we get out there, because we can be practitioners of love and power right here. It is popular to ask people what they would have done during the civil rights movement, what they would have done during the Holocaust, what change you'd make if you were president for a day. But you don't have to ask yourself what you would have done during times of uncertainty, distress, and injustice. You are living in them. You have always been. You don't need to ask yourself what you would do if you ever had the power. You have the power now, and you've always had it. Your power is not defined by a title. It is not defined by your willingness to live in alignment. It is defined by your willingness to live in alignment with a purpose bigger than yourself. We are called to make the world better, each and every one of us. We bear that responsibility in exchange for our inhabitants on this earth, whether we accept it or not. And your privilege increases your duty, whether you accept it or not. And whether it is with one child or your single family household or with entire congregations, your power is waiting on you to pick it up, inform it with love and expectancy, and work.
I remember being electrified when I heard those words that you heard from Brittany Packnett. I've dedicated a lot of time in the 2000s to community organizing. Part of that time, I led that about 35-member congregationally based community organizing project known as Arise here in the New York Capital Region. I've thought about and practiced this divine union of love and power inside and outside of Albany UU. Hearing Packnett celebrated as the core of her organizing work too was very heartening. Being called in to dismantle white supremacy culture as a cisgender heterosexual white identified male is encouraging. Anti-racism work can be very difficult when your identities are woven into the racist, sexist, ableist, and homophobic power structure. Packnett celebrates Dr. King's principles as guiding her work. As is well known, King was strongly influenced by Gandhi's effectiveness to bring together faith and political action. Satyagraha, a word that Gandhi focused on, brings together two Sanskrit words. Sat is being itself. Satya expresses the absolute existence of what is true. Agraha is a polite insistence or holding firmly to something of value. The satyagraha is holding firmly to what is true and real and rejecting what is false, misleading, and deceptive. Satyagraha had its own power to activate change that didn't require violence. Dr. King had a powerful message of Christian love, but not an effective example from Jesus of how to create institutional change. Jesus' prophetic action, overturning the tables of the money changers in the temple, failed to stop the temple's collusion with the Roman Empire. His protest scattered his followers and got him killed. Christian integration into the Holy Roman Empire's systems of oppression didn't guide King either. And Protestant Christian collusion with slavery discouraged him even more. Gandhi solved the problem for King of how love that Jesus taught and manifested in the world could become a force for social transformation. The Montgomery bus boycott that began in December of 1955 gave the new 26-year-old pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, a church that is just 2 blocks from the capital of Alabama, which was the seat of the Confederacy, a chance to test these Gandhian ideas to see if they might work. Using strategies of massive disruption and resistance, but without the use of violence. Amazingly, they did. It worked with the Freedom Riders. It worked to gain federal civil rights and voting rights legislation. Amazing successes that catapulted the young minister into the national spotlight. I know some of the people here have lived through this time and watched it unfold with their own eyes. Yet for all the successes remembered, looking back over a great distance of time and space, most of us don't know about the power struggles. The leaders of the civil rights movement struggled with each other every step of the way. The Gandhian principles were not familiar to many, nor persuasive. Successes came, but they heightened awareness of how far Black folks were from their goals. Every step forward encountered barriers. Advocates of white supremacy constantly worked to undo, undermine, and subvert their gains. The federal courts were the most effective and reliable tool to implement their legislative gains. The slow gains made young Black leaders impatient. With the taste of victory on their lips, they hungered for more, making setbacks all the more intolerable. They sought to force more gains through the application of power, Black power. During the Mississippi Freedom March of June 1966, the first shouts of Black power were heard alongside shouts of freedom now. Floyd McKissick, National Director of the Congress for Racial Equality, or CORE, and Stokely Carmichael from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, joined Dr. King on this march after James Meredith had been shot in the back at the beginning of the march. Carmichael and McKissick argued that Black power was a better rallying cry for the movement to bring them together. Dr. King strongly disagreed. They argued about this for the rest of the march. The press immediately picked up the chant and the controversy and fed it with their divisive coverage. The advocacy of a more aggressive assertion of Black power has a long history. Slave revolts were part of Black resistance from the beginning. Hundreds of slave rebellions and insurrections took place in North America since the 17th century, including the one led by Nat Turner in Virginia in 1831. Some, like the Haitian Rebellion, won them their freedom. The novelty of Gandhian nonviolence competed with the more conventional revolutionary ideas of how to instigate social change that incorporated violence or the threat of violence. In Dr. King's essay, Black Power, in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here, published in 1967, deeply reflects on the Black Power movement. In it, he writes, love is defined with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. It was this misinterpretation that caused Nietzsche, the philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Now, Dr. King was a realist. He thought Black folks had little to gain through violence and an enormous amount to lose. Black people in most communities are outnumbered and outgunned. The state has access to police, the National Guard, and even the Army. In the South in the 1960s, there were many white folks itching for an excuse to start killing as many Negroes as they could and put them back in their place. Fear was already very present, and amplifying it could cause a bloodbath. The kind of violence already seen in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Elaine, Arkansas, and Rosewood Massacre in Florida. The problem with using the force of violence is it doesn't change people's minds. More often, it raises up a second generation of men ready to take revenge for their family's blood that was shed. As Dr. King famously said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Dr. King wanted a moral victory of changed hearts and minds. He was fighting for the truth of the best of the American vision of equality, justice, and equal opportunity. It was the truth force of those commitments embedded in the hearts of white Americans he wanted to bring forth that had not yet been realized. These were core values found in Christianity too, that blacks and whites worshiping in separate churches both affirmed. No matter how many portraits of Jesus are made that show him with a blonde hair and blue eyes, the Jesus we find in the Gospels was a marginalized person who was executed with two common criminals. Jesus has always been way more black than he is white. And that has always had amazing satyagraha. In Dr. King's words, the beauty of nonviolence is that in its own way and in its own time, it seeks to break the chain reaction of evil. With its majestic sense of spiritual power, it seeks to elevate truth, beauty, and goodness to the throne. Therefore, I will continue to follow this method because I think it is the most practically sound and morally excellent way for the Negro to achieve freedom. Blacks are and will be, for the foreseeable future, a racial minority in this nation. Dr. King knew that they could never force their will on the nation without the risk of significant backlash. He wanted to build an interracial coalition on values that whites and blacks shared. Love, fairness, and justice are human values that are almost universally embraced in America. They link easily with our Unitarian Universalist first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our second principle of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. While the Black Power movement of the 1960s has come and gone, the tensions remain today. The gains made during that period have eroded with the election of the president in 2016, who saw white racists as part of his core constituency, and the 2013 Supreme Court's decision, Shelby County versus Holder, to strip the 1965 Voting Rights Act of its teeth, leading, as we've seen, to voter suppression. The Unitarian Universalist Association and our congregations have been standing against the rollbacks and working to dismantle the white supremacy culture that persists in our congregations, leadership, and institutions. And I don't see any sign from the UUA board, which I sit on as a member, President Susan Frederick Gray, or our UUA staff, or future presidents from backing away from our commitments clearly expressed by the Commission on Institutional Change in their report, June 2020. That report and our commitment to it and to transformational work in our congregations and society at large is still needed. One of the first and most important commitments, and for white folks the hardest, is centering the issues and concerns of marginalized people. Most people naturally center themselves and their concerns and issues. It is a major step back from personal self-interest to center the needs of the oppressed. This begins with a serious commitment to listening for understanding and empathy first, stepping out of the center of attention and to make room for other voices. Listeners may or may not agree with what they hear, but the centering of the marginalized, by doing that, they are dealing with issues of oppression first before they deal with the dominant group agenda. With their commitment of time and attention, they are saying to the marginalized, you care and you matter. Countering the message of the marginalized get from the dominant culture constantly, day in and day out. For those whose identities are white, dismantling racism requires a recognition of how it works internally as a socially conditioned response. It is like an asymptomatic social disease, a chronic infection caught from the culture before we even entered kindergarten or first grade. It has been growing and colonizing our brains ever since. Getting this disease is not our fault. None of us consented for this toxic condition to grow silently within us. But once we start becoming aware of its presence, it is our responsibility to begin to heal it. It is like a chronic infection we are unlikely to ever be able to remove from our system completely. But we can do a great deal to manage the symptoms and prevent spreading the infection to others. So much of this disease process works deep in our subconscious. It takes concentrated attention to witness it and reprogram our thinking and responses. This isn't just a white problem. Dr. King discussed the 5 ways slave owners used to control the minds of their slaves. Well, slavery has now ended. The toxic patterns of self-destructive thinking are infections that are passed down from generation to generation in the Black community. Every American who grew up here is infected with some version of this toxic social brew. And we all need to help each other liberate ourselves from it. One way that we can do that is by building cross-racial relationships to help us contradict the stereotypes we might have subconsciously picked up over the years. As we learned with marriage equality, it is knowing people and appreciating the fullness of their humanity that helps change hearts and minds more than anything else. Finally, this is the work of a lifetime. Anti-racism trainer Robin DiAngelo helped me to give up the idea that I'll ever be completely free from the toxicity of racism. That doesn't mean I can't make great strides. It just means that I am going to be prone to making mistakes, to hurting others now and then unintentionally. The goal of freeing ourselves from this social disease isn't perfection. It is being willing to disidentify with these patterns as we become aware of them. And when they appear out of our subconscious in surprising ways, to take responsibility for them, make a real apology, and make amends for the harms caused. If we keep love at the center of this work and not fear or self-hate or self-judgment, then I believe we will be able to answer Brittany Packnett's call and realize the divine union of love and power right here, right now, as we build beloved community together. May it be so.